Morning, everybody. I got 30 minutes on the clock and we started counting down. So I appreciate being here today and catching up with a lot of friends last night and new friends, new faces I haven't met before. So I've only got 30 minutes and then Matt and I will be up on stage for Q&A afterwards. But you might think this is strange, but bear with me. I think a lot in my life about the humble goldfish. And I think by the end of today's 30 minutes, I expect all of you will probably think a lot more about goldfish than you do today. So the humble goldfish is going to help us navigate through the amount of change happening in this industry. So my thesis and the thesis for the book and the new book I have coming out is that this industry has been more or less static for the last 100 years. Yes, the internet came along and changed the way consumers shop for vehicles, not so much how they buy vehicles, and that did shift a lot of the advertising spend towards digital. A lot of us now, 20 years later, are using a lot more software tools at the dealership. But for the most part, the way the consumer interacts with car dealers, the way that they actually buy vehicles, and the way that they service vehicles hasn't changed that much. And hopefully I can convince you of this today, right, in my short time with you, that the pace of change is accelerating. It will continue to accelerate. And as we saw in the video here, we all need to be ready to embrace this change and bear with it. I've broken down the presentation today into 5 segments. One is reevaluating the sales model in general and what we've learned specifically over the last couple of years through COVID with the strained relationship sometimes between the automakers and the dealers. EVs, top of mind for everyone. Everyone's got an opinion. Always amazing to me every time I post anything on LinkedIn, just the polarization of America around this conspiracy theories and geopolitical problems, et cetera, around EVs. So we'll dig into that a little bit today. I'm sure there'll be some questions when Matt and I are up on stage. Fixed operations or servicing and repairing vehicles, because as we move to EVs, that's going to change pretty significantly at the dealership and cause tensions as well. Subscriptions, this isn't the subscriptions that Matt will talk about a little later, but the unbundling of vehicle features into monthly payments, which is always, again, a very polarizing topic. And then we'll talk about, as we wrap, final considerations. So let's dive into the sales model. So it's very interesting to me. We had this confluence of 2 things over the last couple of years during COVID. One, the automakers and dealers, but the automakers perked up and said, wow, isn't it amazing when we can artificially limit supply and we get the rank and file consumer who's been used to buying vehicles at a discount to pay MSRP and above, and how much more profitable the OEMs are and the dealers are as a result when you artificially limit supply. Right? At the same time, we've got automakers, the legacy automakers, in some cases, publicly traded automaker CEOs proclaiming this on earnings calls, how envious they are now that Tesla has come of age and has higher margins than the legacy OEMs. Right? And we'll see what's happened. I mean, Elon Musk has not hesitated to send warning shots across the bows of things legacy OEMs that are building up their EV portfolio to say, stay off my turf. And we'll get to that a little later today. But these two things that we've seen during COVID have really had the OEMs thinking, how might we redefine the relationship between us and the car dealer? Right? And I know there's a bunch of OEMs in the room. I think that the way I express this typically to dealers is the OEM's hearts are in the right place, to drive more margin, right? And while at the same time providing a better consumer experience. But as we see with this, Volkswagen decided to relaunch the Scout brand, the iconic SUV from the 60s and 70s, as an all-EV brand, but failed to alert and notify their dealer base, which infuriated the Volkswagen dealers out there to say, what about us? Why did we find out last? Another parallel, and not a pick on specific OEMs, because this has kind of been a recurring theme over the last 3 years across almost every single OEM. But if you were at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January of this year, we finally got a peek at the Honda-Sony JV called the Afeela, which, by the way, isn't a very attractive vehicle. I didn't think it was a very attractive. It's kind of like a blob, right? But I think that's intentional because 2 things that they said that week were, one, they're going to try to offer this vehicle on a 10-year lease a 10-year lease to a consumer, and every year the consumer will get software upgrades. So they may get performance upgrades, range upgrades, in-cabin experiences. So while you buy the same physical vehicle, the vehicle will look and feel and drive differently every year as it gets upgraded. But more importantly, is that they signal, I think there's a little bit of a faux pas, they said, we don't know if we'll actually use a dealer network to sell this car. This car is branded Honda. And we don't know if we do elect to use franchise dealers to sell these vehicles, if we'll use the Honda network or we'll use other franchise dealers. We can imagine how much of a irritation this created to the Honda dealers as they announced these things. So again, I think where things typically break down in life is between the theoretical and the practical. Sometimes, on a whiteboard in a boardroom, some of these things sound great, but it has caused a lot of friction and will continue to cause a lot of friction with dealers. Where there aren't state franchise laws to protect dealers as there are in the US, we're seeing many of the OEMs push much more aggressively towards redefining the franchise model overseas. So in this case, Stellantis a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, announced that they were going to terminate the relationships with 100,000 of their franchisees in continental Europe and replace those franchise agreements with agent reselling agreements. Primarily, the difference is two things. One, the dealer will no longer have to worry about taking the inventory risk on new vehicles. All the inventory will sit on the balance sheet of Stellantis corporate, and Stellantis will look after marketing to the local consumer. Well, for those dealers in the room, imagine if you had no advertising budget and you had to rely on the OEMs to spend all your advertising at a local level. You would know how that would work out. I don't have to tell you. But we'll see how this plays out in different countries, with different dynamics around the world. But as you can see here, there is this notion, which the seed has been planted during COVID, that, hey, if we can control supply, can we create the entire supply chain, meaning the automakers and the dealers to be much more profitable? And theoretically, the answer is yes. In practice, I don't know how that's going to play out. Last thing I'll say here is that we can see some indications of how this might play out. So 5 years ago, Mercedes announced in Australia that they were going to move from a legacy franchise model to an agent model. Honda's done the same thing in Australia. Well, now you've got more than half of the Mercedes dealers in Australia who are suing Mercedes-Benz corporate for misrepresentation around how this is all played out. And many of them are arguing a lot of their net worth is gone because their franchises are worth a lot less as a result. So this won't set legal precedent back here in the US, but dealers around the world are watching cases like this to see how these things play out in local courts of law to see what the implications might be back here in the US. So if that wasn't enough, we'll switch to EVs. So interestingly, if you talk to most consultant firms, you get this triangulation that by 2030, by 2032, half of the passenger vehicles sold in the US will be plug-in electric vehicles, either full BEVs or plug-in hybrids. If you don't sense the doubt in my voice, I doubt this is going to happen. I don't believe there's big conspiracies going on around EVs and cramming them down consumers' throats. I just think that there will not be the demand for consumers for this percentage of EVs within another 7-year period. And just to calibrate, we left last year at about a 5.6% run rate of passenger vehicles being plug-in electric. Michael Dunn, if you don't follow him, a great observer of sort of global EVs, specifically putting into perspective China. He's got a lot of experience in China. He had an article out 2 weeks ago, why are we stuck at about 7%, which is kind of flatlined for the year, right? We haven't really broken through 7%. I think we might be hovering just shy of 8% right now in terms of passenger vehicles that are EVs. And I would say that my condensation of his list is really down to 3 things. And these are all interrelated, right? So we've got range anxiety. Consumers have range anxiety that they're going to run out of range or not be able to take that weekend trip up into the mountains. There's charger availability, and that's physical charger availability and what percentage of those chargers actually work when I show up to them. And then there's charger speed. Obviously, I can pull into a gas station and be out of the gas station within 5 minutes. Not the case with charging today. I have to plan my stops around if I'm going to go to Starbucks or do grocery shopping or have a meal. All of these things are interrelated. We're going to see more battery chemistry progress very quickly here, which has implications on residual values for used vehicles and used generations. But we will see evolution here, but we need a lot of evolution, I believe, before we're going to have real breakthroughs in demand for consumers. J.D. Power had 2 studies this year. This data was from Q1 this year, where they looked at a sample set of chargers across the U.S. and found that more than 1 in 5 chargers didn't work. And it could be they were offline, it could be they were broken, incompatible with the software handshake between the vehicle and the charger. Compare that to the Tesla network. There was about 4% of chargers didn't work within the Tesla network. And you wonder why we've had this pendulum swing, and many of the legacy OEMs have said they're going to build reverse compatibility into the Tesla charging network standard. So why is it? Why is it, given all that, you can believe me or not with what the percentage is going to be, why are we seeing some OEMs proclaim we're going all EV? We're going 100% EV. Well, I mean, I believe that the publicly traded legacy automaker CEOs are in a bit of a tight spot, right? We'll talk about this as we go through the presentation today. But you have to appease the Wall Street lords, gods. You have to anticipate what consumers are going to want, and you have to manage the dealer network, which they don't always do very, very efficiently, like the examples I've shown earlier, right? So I can tell you this, by 2035, Mary Barra, who's the CEO of GM, who's now 63, is likely not going to be the CEO. So will there be accountability back to this proclamation back in 2022? We can get to 2030, right? I think we got like GM employees over here that are laughing, but we can get to 2030 and we can be like, we make 15 grand a copy off those gas 4x4 Silverados in Texas. Are we really going to sunset that plant and go all EV? We'll show you in a few slides how much Ford is losing with their EV operations and what they're forecasting year to date. But I can say that, for the health of these legacy automakers, they appreciate right now that they've got really, really healthy ICE, internal combustion operations to help fund the big gaping holes that they're losing on their EV operations, and that's going to go on into the future. So, who remembers the Pontiac Aztek? All right, we got some dealers in here. Any Pontiac dealers that sold Azteks? Not one. Okay, no one will admit to it. So for those of you that are a little younger and don't know the Pontiac Aztek, it probably is like the ugliest car that was ever built. So this is a car that was built and there was no consumer demand and they couldn't get the fleets to take them, et cetera. So we're about to see the same thing play out, but on steroids. So over the next 2 years, we're going to see 130 new EV models. Okay, so we've got the OEMs that have committed. The legacy OEMs have already committed. They're already building these vehicles. They're in planning, et cetera. Somewhere in this mix, I can't point it out right now, but somewhere in this mix, there will be an EV that's produced that has zero consumer demand. It'll either be the wrong range, wrong configuration, not competitive in its class. I typically rent, I should admit to this maybe because I'll infuriate somebody, but I rent pretty religiously from Hertz when I go to cities when I'm not using Uber. And I can tell you, I'm amazed now. You go to President's Circle, the percentage of the vehicles that are EVs, and they're always the last ones, right? They can be out of all the ICE vehicles, except for some shitty small cars, and the EVs are the ones that are left, right? So I think that when they build these vehicles, historically, when an OEM builds a vehicle and there isn't a lot of consumer demand, they could do one of two things, right? They can vent them into fleet and give huge incentives for the Hertzes and Avises of the world to take these vehicles. And by the way, they're already pretty saturated. I don't think there's going to be a lot of demand. Or they can layer on consumer-facing incentives and dealer-facing incentives, and I think it's going to be a bloodbath. So one piece of advice is if you have a friend or a loved one who wants to buy an EV, just wait. In 9 months to 12 months, there'll be such screaming deals that they'll be practically, in some cases, giving away EVs because we're going to overproduce in certain segments. Okay, so amongst all this, given all this, you can agree with me or not, but I think we could agree that no time soon will there be 100% demand for EVs in terms of passenger vehicles. How on earth, if we're running an OEM, do we decide how quickly we make the investments to retool our factories to go to EVs? That's compounded even more with the current union strike and trying to figure out like how am I going to look at my existing footprint of factories and retool at what speed. All right, number 3, service and repair. So what we do know is that the number of moving components within an EV is dramatically less than a comparable ICE vehicle. And there are implications for service and parts here, obviously, from that. Now, that one part on the right-hand side, that green part, is 40 to 50% of the EV's value. It's very close to the road, and if one of those cells gets damaged, they haven't figured out how to make individual cells swappable yet. So it has big implications on insurance premiums, as we'll see too, and total losses. This was the best example I could find. I need to find a better example, but what I've tried to do here is contrast up above an EV with a comparable ICE vehicle and the amount of service needed. And you can kind of squint and see just like the rough magnitude here. But the EV doesn't need oil changes, doesn't need spark plugs, right? The only thing that will be changing more frequently on these vehicles are tires, because they do weigh more and have more torque. So if you've got a lead foot, so to speak, you may burn through tires more quickly. But beyond that, I mean, we on a VIN-by-VIN basis, on a vehicle-by-vehicle basis, dealers are going to see these cars less frequently. Yes, the first generation, we see there's more recalls. But as these legacy OEMs figure out how to produce these things without a lot of glitches, and they go on to the second, third generation, I believe that on a VIN-by-VIN basis, they're going to see individual cars much less frequently, which for a dealer should be like, ooh, that doesn't sound very good. Now, there are countervailing tailwinds, I believe, that I'll present in a minute, that I think that more than offset this dynamic. But you're going to see that customer that buys that EV much less frequently in your service lanes than you did in the past when they owned ICE vehicles. Jose Munoz says his rule of thumb is that about a comparable EV will need about 1/3 of the service needs of a comparable ICE vehicle. And then big implications also on OEMs that run very profitable wholesale parts operations. Over the lifetime of an EV, McKinsey estimates that we'll need about 40% fewer parts sold for every single EV versus the ICE counterpart. Over-the-air updates has a big impact as well on we haven't even got to subscriptions and unbundling of features, but a big impact on service and parts. So if you recall, 5 years ago, when Tesla launched the Model 3 and the Model Y, Consumer Reports did their scientific study on this vehicle and gave it really bad ratings. They said, and I'll paraphrase, this vehicle brakes worse than a full-size F-150 pickup truck. So within its class, it was not competitive whatsoever. Elon Musk, in his typical manner, gets on Twitter, says that Consumer Reports is full of crap, their methodology is crap, etc. And then 5 days later, he circles back to Consumer Reports and said, would you mind testing the car again? And they said, no, we're very scientific with our methodology. We can assure you, if we test the same car again, we're going to get exactly the same results. Well, he implores them, convinces them to test the same car. This car has been sitting out on the Consumer Reports lot. No one's touched this car. They test the same car, and to their shock and amazement, the car has dropped 20 feet from 60 miles an hour to 0 in braking. And suddenly it's very competitive within its class. The only difference is they pushed a software update to the car. So this one event opened the Pandora's box around everything else I'm going to talk about today. And all the legacy OEMs said, interesting. If we can change the driving dynamics of a car through a software push and not have a technician ever touch the car, what else can we do? What else can we change in that vehicle? And has unlocked all this brainstorming around, we're going to unlock features as a service, et cetera, and big implications on service overall. So the legacy automakers are seeing dollar signs. This is information from IHS, which forecasts that by 2025, we're going to see $60 billion. These are billions of dollars. $60 billion in cost savings, really from avoidance of recalls and warranty work that otherwise would have been done at the dealership and the OEMs would have reimbursed the dealership for, that can now be done through software updates. And whether they hit these targets or not, I mean, this is all money that is cost avoidance that will flow through to the bottom line of the automakers. So you can see why they're salivating to say, wow, you know, we need to build up our software competency to enable this future. The cars are getting much more sophisticated, in some cases 30, 35 external facing sensors, cameras, radar, LiDAR. There are no longer any small minor fender benders. For those of you that are running collision operations, you know this firsthand. But I think that, you know, the tailwind that franchise dealers are going to feel is this. So this is data from one of our portfolio companies, WarCloud, that shows on average, and it's not consistent across every brand, but you know, I've always heard this for the last 20 years in automotive, that at the end of the warranty period, about 70% of consumers stop taking their vehicles into franchise dealers for service. The perception is that it's cheaper to get it done at my local independent repair shop. Well, I think we're going to see a massive flattening of this curve, meaning that consumers are going to be driven back and be much more loyal into the service lanes of franchise dealers for a number of reasons, not the least of which is all these technology devices on the vehicles. The technician skill, the specialized technician skill, the average technician at a Jiffy Lube isn't going to have the skill set nor the tools to be able to work on these very sophisticated technology devices. So I think this is the countervailing tailwind for dealers. While on a VIN-by-VIN basis, I think the EV they're going to see less frequently. They're going to see many more of those EVs continue to be service customers long after the warranty period's over, because consumers are going to go back in, as you would go back in for your Apple device to the Apple store and not trust a local vendor to fix your screen. I think many more consumers are going to be bringing their cars back into franchise dealers. So it's going to be very interesting to see if that hypothesis plays out, but I would be willing to bet on it. So we will see, you know, more right to repair acts. We'll see national right to repair acts, but you know, there's a big difference between the OEM saying, yeah, you can have access to the telematics on the vehicles and the schematics, and having, again, the technician skill and the specialized tools needed to be able to work on these vehicles. So we'll see a movement towards right to repair act. I think the OEMs will do everything within their power to ensure that these vehicles continue to come back to the franchise dealers for service even after the warranty period's over. And then two other observations here, right? So Elon Musk, who I guess collected Hot Wheels cars when he was a kid, fancies himself to say, we're going to die cast the entire frame of Teslas going forward. And you know, one of the beauties of unibody construction is you can kind of pull off of a quarter when it's damaged and replace it. When you die cast the entire frame of a vehicle and it's integrated into the battery, and the battery's load bearing as well, bad things like this happen. You have a minor, you know, bumper here that should have been able to be replaced cheaply, and you know, it turns into a $42,000 repair. I talked to a guy last week who runs collision shops, and he said, look, 10 years ago, to replace a bumper on a Camry, it was $500. Now it's $5,000 because of all the software or the hardware inside the bumper and everything that needs to get recalibrated as a result. And we're seeing the insurance companies' heads are spinning, right? This will manifest in higher insurance premiums for EVs versus ICE vehicles. You know, these battery packs, which again are 40, 50% of the entire cost of a vehicle, can get damaged. And when they get damaged, the rest of the car can be perfect. They'll just write off the entire vehicle. Right? So total loss thresholds are changing very quickly for battery vehicles as well. Eventually, we'll figure out ways to like repair these batteries and swap components. But for the time being, that's a sealed unit, a very expensive sealed unit. And if it gets damaged, catastrophic things happen, and we're all going to pay higher insurance premiums as a result. All right, I've got a few minutes left here. Subscriptions, so unbundling features as a service. So not to pick on Tesla, but they were way ahead of the legacy OEMs around software competency. So this was 2 years ago. So for the same vehicle, the Model 3, Model Y, Tesla announces they're going to remove a feature from the vehicle. The adjustable passenger lumbar support, the back support, they're actually going to remove. And their rationale for removing it, they said that 97% of drivers never use that feature. So the OEMs are watching, and they're monitoring with all these sensors in the vehicle which buttons you're pushing, which features you're pushing, and are able to change the production of the vehicle, but more interesting, they'll be able to price discriminate, I believe, based on how much you use particular features. I grew up in Toronto. What I would have paid for heated seats is a lot higher than me living in Atlanta now. So they'll be able to build the right vehicle with the right features, but also probably price discriminate based on how much you actually use any individual feature. And they will know, when different drivers are in the car, which features you use more frequently. So Mary Barra at an investor conference 2 years ago stood up and said, look, stop thinking of us as a device maker. Yes, we make the device, but we're not really going to make the profit on the device. We're going to build the device, but just like a phone, we're then going to sell apps, right, to unlock functionality afterwards. And all of that functionality afterwards that we enable to be unlocked is going to be high margin recurring revenue. And Wall Street analysts like those two things. They really like high margin recurring revenue, right? So there's a lot of things that have to happen to get there, including do consumers actually, will they take these products? But GM stock that particular month performed very, very well. The confluence of proclaiming that we're going to go 100% EV and create most of our margin off of high margin recurring software revenue, the analysts eat this stuff up. So GM, Ford, Stellantis have all said that they will generate by 2030 more than $20 billion in new revenue by unbundling features and offering them to consumers to pay for on a monthly basis. And this always causes like a visceral reaction. People, especially like of my generation, are like, how dare they? How could they build a car with features and not give them away to everybody who buys that vehicle and charge them afterwards? But think about how many death by 1,000 cuts software subscriptions you pay for today on your credit card, whether it's Disney Plus or however you get ESPN into your house or Amazon subscriptions, et cetera. I mean, we've conditioned a younger generation to appreciate the fact that only charge me for the features that I actually use, right? And give me the convenience. If I want to use heated seats or a cold weather package only for the 6 months out of the year in Toronto when I need them, allow me to only pay for those 6 months. So I think the freight train has left the station. I think that this is inevitable, despite the fact that some of the OEMs have got a little bit of a pushback. I think it's inevitable that we're going to see more of this going forward. You've seen Mercedes recently say, hey, we're going to build in functionality into the vehicle, and you're going to be able to unlock anytime you want extra horsepower or extra range. Tesla the same. I mean, Tesla will build all the vehicles the same. And if you want, the extra plaid horsepower, you're going to be able to unlock it. The innate ability to unlock it is going to be in the car. And yes, there'll be people who try to hack into these things. The outcome might not be too good for them, but there will be the ability. The OEMs will be thinking more about conforming to one build spec and then allowing consumers after they buy to potentially unlock features. And that will only be accelerated through new enhanced software upgrades. And then there'll be shocks, right? You saw this in Motor Trend recently, where someone bought a F-150 Lightning and didn't read the fine print and didn't realize that some of the features were on a 90-day trial. Wi-Fi hotspots, enhanced navigation, et cetera. So it's going to be increasingly important to know when I buy a vehicle, how many of those features that I come to appreciate in the first 30, 60, 90 days, actually I'm going to have to start paying for at some point when the trial period is over. And then this does create this tension with who owns the dash, right? So there was an article, I think this week from BCG, that half of consumers wouldn't buy a vehicle if it didn't have CarPlay or Android Auto, right? GM has said that in their next generation of EVs, they're moving away from CarPlay and Android Auto, right? You won't be able to plug your phone in and have it manifest on the dash. And I think that they're fighting upstream now, right? Well, show of hands in here. How many people in this room use the native navigation system on their vehicle? Not one. Oh, we got one. You're a Tesla driver. What do you drive? An Audi. Do you like the nav system?
Only because the native one I can get right on the front dash and not the center console.
Okay, so it's because of the screen where it renders. But yeah, this is very, very typical. I'll maybe get like 3 people in an audience who use the native, and 2 of those people are Tesla drivers, right? How many people in this audience drive a Tesla? Wow, only 3, and you guys are young. There you go. All right, cool. So, or admitted anyway. And GM has said that they're going to go away from it. So I've only got a few minutes left, so let me move through this pretty quickly because Matt's going to come up next. So here's a challenge. So I've got legacy automakers with the uncertainty around what consumer demand is going to be for EVs, trying to figure out when I make these huge capital investments to retool my plants. At the same time saying, I want to unlock all this future software subscription, and also I want to have cost avoidance for fixed operations through recall and warranty avoidance through software updates. So I need to go buy like armies of software developers. And by the way, as manifest from the question I just asked, the legacy automakers have not been very good in the past building software. I don't know how that's suddenly going to change, right? So when you've got these two things at the same time, I think these are the insurmountable for small-scale automakers. How on earth are they going to thread both those needles at the same time? Figure out the timing to retool to go all EV, at the same time build up a competency in software to achieve all these lofty goals in the future. And like if you have seen this, oh, I like the animation worked. Who hasn't seen this movie? Good. You make me very happy. This is probably the best opening 8 minutes of any movie ever. And I know I'm totally biased. But by the way, for those that haven't seen it, the next like 5 minutes doesn't work out very well for him. Not according to plan. So that's my point here. I think that what we're going to see is a lot of pain inflicted. Volkswagen software arm is expected to lose. Well, actually, they lost $2 billion last year. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose the same amount this year. And we've seen Ford just increased their expectations for loss. It was going to be $3 billion this year in their EV division, and it's now going to be $4.5 billion. It may be higher by the end of the year if Elon Musk continues to mess around with retail prices and competition. But thank goodness that Ford has very profitable ICE divisions. People down here in Texas love their F-150 gas trucks. And they also have a very profitable commercial division to offset some of the losses in EVs. All right, so finally, let me wrap here. So residual values, I don't know how on earth we set residual values for EVs in the future, given everything that's going on. I mean, for any dealers that are in the room that were stocking used Teslas, I bet you aren't stocking used Teslas, because how on earth do you take a used Tesla in on appraisal when Elon Musk might drop the retail price for new Teslas by 10 grand tomorrow? I mean, it's really scared dealers away from quoting appraisal values on used Teslas and buying them in the auction lanes. This is going to become very, very volatile, right? This 130 new makes and models of new EVs, how on earth do we set residual values and what these cars are going to be worth at the end of 3 years in terms of a lease? Especially in this environment where you see how aggressively year to date Tesla has dropped retail prices. And this is just a warning shot across the bow of Ford and GM to say, look, you're coming into my turf, right? I've got more margin than you. I'm going to play with that margin, and I'm going to push you, make it as painful as possible for you to continue to execute your EV plans. That's really what's happening. Polestar, as an example. So Polestar says, hey, with the next generation of their Polestar 2, we're going to have faster charge times, more range as well, and faster charge times. So how on earth do you compete with this, and what's a used Polestar 2 worth when this announcement comes out? So we're going to see so much innovation in battery technology so quickly that a 2-3-year-old used EV is going to depreciate that much more quickly, and there's a lot of uncertainty around that as well. How are subscription revenues going to be shared between dealers and OEMs? If Mary Barra does convince you to pay $20 a month for rear heated seats, and you activate that after you bought the car from the dealer, will the dealer who sold you the vehicle have any claim on revenue share? And some of these negotiations are playing out in real time. And then in terms of window stickers, so the window sticker of the future is going to have a grayed out area. So yes, there are going to be some features that are turned on when you buy the vehicle and persist to the next owner. But in many cases, they may or may not be turned on, and then they're going to be variable. So there needs to be a clearinghouse for any individual VIN number to know which features are active and which aren't, how much are these things being paid for, et cetera. Because imagine in the future an appraiser at an auction that's taking a trade-in who's looking at a vehicle and has no idea which features are going to get canceled. that I'm looking at today when the consumer goes home tonight and cancels 7 of these monthly subscription products on their credit card. So the car tomorrow could look very different than the car today, and that's going to cause a lot of disruption as well. So let me move through, because I know I'm over time here. I had a couple more jabs at Ford, but let's get back to our little buddy here. So this is the reason that I spend time thinking about goldfish, and why I think that you probably, after I present this to you, might do the same. So evolution is an amazing thing. Adaptation is an amazing thing. If you take this little guy and leave him in a small bowl, then he'll stay small. And you take the same goldfish and put him in a bowl twice as big, he'll actually grow, he or she, will grow in proportion to the size of the bowl. And if you take this little goldfish and you put this little goldfish in a lake, if it doesn't die while it's young, because predators get it, it turns into this. Believe it or not. Do not experiment with this at home. You could try it in your bathtub, maybe. Your significant other might not appreciate that. So, I thought about the theme today, Inspire, Matt, and I thought, as all these changes come to automotive, one thing we can do is run for the hills, right? It's too much change, we can't take it, etc. I think a testament to you being here today is probably that you're ready to embrace this change. But our collective goldfish bowl, which has been pretty stacked for the last 100 years, is growing very quickly, right? So let's all channel our inner goldfish and embrace the lake and grow into our surroundings. So with that, thank you very much. I know I'm over time. And thank you.